2:15 in the morning. The South China Sea. The USS North Carolina was already deep into a high-speed pursuit. This was not a standard patrol. The target they were tracking was moving at 30 knots without producing a single decibel of engine noise. It was a physical impossibility that the sonar team was now forced to accept as reality. The Virginia-class attack submarine moved through the pressurized darkness of the deep ocean. At 400 feet below the surface, the water was a cold and heavy weight against the steel hull. Commander Miller stood in the center of the darkened command center. The only light came from the soft blue and green glow of the tactical displays. He watched the waterfall display on the sonar console. Usually, a surface vessel moving at that speed would sound like a freight train underwater. This target was different. It was a ghost. 2:30 in the morning. The sonar supervisor adjusted his headset. He looked up at the commander. His face was pale in the dim light. "Sir, contact Sierra 1 is maintaining 32 knots. Bearing remains constant. We are still getting zero cavitation. No blade rate. No engine harmonics. If I did not have a solid active return, I would say there is nothing there." Miller leaned over the console. "Is it a biological contact? A whale?" The supervisor shook his head. "Negative, sir. The return is too hard. It is steel. Or something denser. It is a surface vessel, but it is moving like it is sliding on ice." The USS North Carolina was one of the most advanced pieces of technology ever built by human hands. It was designed to hear a door hinge squeak in a submarine 5 miles away. Yet, as they trailed the Chinese vessel toward the restricted waters of Hainan Island, the ocean remained silent. The target was a gray smudge on the horizon of their electronic world. It was a mystery that felt like a threat. 2:45 in the morning. The distance to the Chinese coast was closing rapidly. The target was now less than 12 miles from the territorial waters of Hainan. This was the most sensitive military zone in the region. It was the home of the Chinese nuclear submarine fleet. If the North Carolina followed the contact any further, they would be crossing a line that could trigger a diplomatic crisis or a war. The executive officer stepped beside Miller. "Commander, we are approaching the 12-mile limit. If we continue this intercept, we will be in their backyard. The Chinese Navy will not ignore an American submarine this close to their pens." Miller did not look away from the screen. "That vessel is not a standard Chinese destroyer. It is something new. If it can move at 30 knots in total silence, the strategic balance of the Pacific just changed. We cannot lose it. The rules of engagement are clear, sir," the executive officer countered. "We are not to engage or provoke." "I am not provoking," Miller said. "I am observing. Maintain current heading. Keep us deep. If that vessel turns into the bay, we follow it just far enough to get a visual signature." The submarine tilted slightly as it adjusted its depth. The crew worked in a silence that matched the ocean outside. Every man on board knew they were drifting into a dangerous game of cat and mouse. They were shadow boxing with a phantom in the dark. The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 3:10 in the morning. The bridge of the Chinese experimental vessel. The interior of the bridge was bathed in a deep red light. Captain Zhao stood perfectly still. He did not look at the ocean outside. He watched a holographic projection of the seabed. The vessel moved with a smoothness that felt unnatural. There was no vibration from the engines. There was no hum from the ventilation. Underneath the hull, a proprietary electromagnetic drive pushed against the seawater with silent, invisible force. The tactical officer spoke in a low voice. "The American submarine is still behind us. Bearing 045. Distance 10 nautical miles." Zhao nodded once. "Maintain the current drive setting. They are curious. Let them watch. They will see nothing but a shadow." The officer looked at his screen. "They are following us into the restricted zone. Should we alert the shore batteries?" "Not yet," Zhao replied. His voice was calm. "Professional. We are the lure. Let them believe they are the hunters. It is easier to trap a cat when it thinks it has caught a mouse." Adjust the field. Give them a reason to close the distance. 3:40 in the morning. On board the USS North Carolina. The sonar supervisor pressed his hand to his headset. He looked at the display, then back at his commander. Captain, contact Sierra 1 just shifted. It did not turn. It drifted. Commander Miller leaned over the console. Explain that. The vessel moved laterally, sir. 500 yards to the east in 6 seconds. At 30 knots. No rudder shift detected. No change in engine rhythm. It just moved sideways. The executive officer looked at the digital chart. That is physically impossible. The drag on the hull at that speed would have ripped the ship apart. No surface vessel can move sideways at 30 knots. Unless it is not pushing against the water, Miller said. His voice was flat. Continue tracking. What is the distance to the headland? 6 nautical miles, sir. Once they round that point, they enter the inner bay. It is a natural harbor with high cliffs on both sides. If we follow them in, we lose our deep water maneuvering room. We will be operating in less than 200 feet of water. 3:50 in the morning. The target began to accelerate again. It was now moving at 40 knots. The wake on the surface would be enormous, but the sonar return remained a whisper. The North Carolina pushed its own reactors to keep pace. The steel of the submarine began to groan, under the pressure of the speed. The vibrations were subtle, but every man in the hull could feel them. Miller made his decision. Prepare the photonic mast. I want a visual the second they clear the spray. We need to know what this hull looks like. Sir, we are inside the 5-mile line, the executive officer warned. Chinese coastal radar will be painting this entire sector. If we put a mast up, we are announcing our presence to every battery on Hainan. They already know we are here, Miller said. But they do not know what we have seen. We stay on them. We follow them around the headland. The American submarine angled its bow upward. It was rising like a predator toward the surface. Ahead, the dark silhouette of the Hainan headland loomed against the stars. The ghost ship was leading them into the mouth of the bay. The ocean was beginning to churn. The silence was over. 4:20 in the morning. The edge of the Hainan coastal shelf. The electronic warfare suite on the USS North Carolina began to scream. It was not a physical sound. It was a digital one. The display showed a forest of red spikes. Chinese shore-based radar was now active across the entire spectrum. They were not just looking for a contact. They were flooding the area with energy to burn through any stealth or interference. The electronic warfare officer spoke rapidly. Commander, we have multiple shore batteries locking on our general sector. They are using high-frequency active sweeps. If we rise any higher, our sail will be visible on their screens like a lighthouse. Miller looked at the depth gauge. We stay at 300 feet. Keep the thermal layer between us and the surface. What is the status of the target? The sonar supervisor did not look up from his screen. Sierra 1 is slowing. They are down to 20 knots. They are approaching the mouth of the bay. They are waiting for us to follow. 4:35 in the morning. On the bridge of the Chinese vessel. Captain Zhao watched the American signature on his tactical map. The submarine was hovering near the edge of the continental shelf. It was a professional move. They were using the cold water layers to hide their heat and noise, but the American commander did not know that Zhao could see him perfectly. The experimental drive did more than move the ship. It acted as a massive sensor array. It used the entire hull as a receiver, the tactical officer reported. The Americans are maintaining depth. They are cautious. They are trailing us by 4,000 meters. Zhao smiled. It was a cold expression. They are doing exactly what their manual tells them to do. They believe they are invisible. Adjust the drive. Decrease the dampening field by 10%. Give them a clearer trail to follow. We must ensure they do not turn back now. 4:50 in the morning. Below the surface, the North Carolina felt the change. The silence of the target suddenly broke. A low-frequency hum began to vibrate through the hull of the submarine. It was the first time the American crew had heard the target make a sound. It was a rhythmic pulse. It sounded like a massive electric motor spinning at high speed. It was a signature that had never been recorded in the history of naval warfare. The sonar supervisor adjusted his settings. I have a firm acoustic signature now. It is a unique pulse. I am recording it for the database. But sir, the sound is coming from the entire ship, not just the stern. The whole hull is vibrating. Miller felt a sense of relief that was quickly replaced by suspicion. Why now? Why would they become noisy right as they enter a restricted bay? It feels like an invitation. The executive officer leaned in. It is a trap, sir. They are leading us into shallow water where we cannot maneuver. We should break off and report back to the 7th Fleet. Miller shook his head. If we leave now, we have nothing but a recording. We need the visual. We need to see what is producing that pulse. We follow them in. Ready the torpedo tubes, 1 and 2. Set them for defensive fire only. The submarine moved forward. The water was getting warmer as the depth decreased. The pressure was changing. They were leaving the safety of the deep ocean behind. Ahead, the high cliffs of the Hainan headland rose out of the dark water. The bay waited like an open mouth. The entrance to the bay was now less than 2 miles away. The shadows were deepening. 5:15 in the morning. The entrance to the inner bay. The target vessel made its move. It did not slow down to navigate the narrow channel between the cliffs. Instead, the acoustic pulse from the Chinese ship intensified. The sound was a high-pitched whine that vibrated through the sonar arrays of the USS North Carolina. On the tactical display, the speed indicator for Sierra 1 jumped. 30 knots, 35, 40. It was charging into the restricted bay at a speed that should have been impossible for such a confined space. The sonar supervisor spoke with urgency. Commander, target is accelerating. 42 knots. They are cutting the corner of the headland. At this speed, they will be inside the bay in less than 3 minutes. Commander Miller gripped the edge of the command table. Match their speed. Bring us to 40 knots. Level off at 150 feet. We are going to lose them if we stay deep. Sir, the water depth is dropping fast, the navigator warned. We have 90 feet of water under the keel. If we hit a thermal or a swell, we are going to scrape the bottom. 5:25 in the morning. Inside the Combat Information Center. The atmosphere in the room was electric with tension. The executive officer stepped closer to Miller. His voice was low and professional. Commander, we need to discuss the rules of engagement. We are now 5 miles inside Chinese territorial waters. We are operating in a restricted military zone. If we are detected, the standing orders are to immediately submerge to maximum depth and egress to international waters. We are doing the opposite. Miller looked at his officer. If we turn back now, we lose the most significant intelligence find of the decade. That vessel is using a propulsion system that bypasses every known law of naval architecture. I am taking responsibility for the incursion. We get the visual. We record the signature. Then we leave. The Chinese will not see it as an intelligence mission, sir, the executive officer countered. They will see it as an act of war. Their shore batteries are active. Their patrol boats are launching. From Hainan, we are running out of room. Maintain pursuit, Miller ordered. We are staying on their 6. 5:35 in the morning. The bridge of the Chinese vessel. Captain Zhao watched the American submarine on his screen. The USS North Carolina was following them like a loyal shadow. It was exactly where he wanted it to be. The American commander was bold. Perhaps too bold. Zhao turned to his tactical officer. The red light of the bridge made his features look like a mask. Activate the secondary field, Zhao said. Let the Americans see the full power of the drive. We are entering the primary zone. The officer hesitated. Sir, if we activate the secondary field now, the distortion might affect the shore radar. They will lose our position as well. That is the point, Zhao replied. In 1 minute, we will be invisible to everyone. The Americans will be left in the dark, and we will be gone. The Chinese ship reached the center of the bay. The cliffs rose high on both sides. The water here was as still as a mirror. The ship did not leave a wake. It seemed to hover just above the surface. Then, with a sound like a low-pitched thunderclap, the air around the vessel began to shimmer. Inside the USS North Carolina, the sonar screen suddenly went white. The acoustic pulse from the target had reached a frequency that overwhelmed the sensors. It was a wall of noise that blocked out everything else. Loss of contact, the sonar supervisor shouted. I have a total whiteout on all arrays. Sierra 1 is gone from the waterfall. Miller stared at the empty screen. How can a ship that size just disappear? Find them. The hunt was no longer a game. It was a crisis. 6:05 in the morning. The center of the inner bay. The USS North Carolina was blind. The acoustic wall generated by the Chinese vessel was absolute. Every sonar array on the American submarine was saturated with a white noise that felt like a physical pressure against the hull. In the command center, the waterfall displays were frozen. The tactical map showed only the last known position of Sierra 1, a ghost icon sitting at the entrance of the bay. Commander Miller looked at the depth gauge. 120 feet. The water was becoming dangerously shallow. He could feel the proximity of the seabed in the way the submarine handled. The vessel was sluggish. The pressure of the confined space was closing in on them. Navigator, report depth to bottom, Miller said. The navigator spoke without looking up. His voice was tight. 70 feet under the keel, sir. We are entering the narrowest part of the channel. If we do not regain sonar contact, we are navigating by memory and luck. 6:15 in the morning. On the bridge of the Chinese vessel, the world had changed. Captain Zhao stood in a silence that was deeper than the ocean. The secondary field had reached its peak. Outside the reinforced windows, the mist of the bay had turned into a swirling gray vortex. The water below the ship was no longer splashing against the hull. It was being pushed away by a localized gravitational distortion. The tactical officer looked at his controls. They were dark. Sir, all external sensors are offline. We are operating within the bubble. The Americans cannot see us. The shore batteries cannot see us. We are effectively removed from the local space. Zhao nodded. Prepare to transition. The Americans followed us into the trap. Now they will witness the exit. 6:20 in the morning. The USS North Carolina rounded the final headland. The cliffs fell away, opening into a wide, circular basin of water surrounded by jagged rock walls. This was the dead end of the bay. There was nowhere else for the Chinese ship to go. Mast is up, the electronic warfare officer shouted, raising the photonic array now. The high-definition camera broke the surface of the water. The image appeared on the main screen in the command center. The morning light was gray and thin. A heavy mist hung over the water, clinging to the surface like a wet shroud. Miller leaned forward, his eyes searching the screen for the silhouette of the Chinese vessel. The bay was empty. The water was as flat as a sheet of polished steel. There was no wake, there was no smoke. There was no sign of a 1,000-ton military ship. The surface of the basin was undisturbed, reflecting the dark cliffs and the pale sky above. Where is it? Miller whispered. Search the entire 360-degree arc. It could not have turned that fast. I am scanning, sir, the officer replied. Thermal is negative. Radar is negative. The bay is clear. There is nothing but water and rock. The sonar supervisor looked up from his dead console. Sir, the noise just stopped. The acoustic whiteout is gone. The command center fell into a silence that was heavier than the noise that had preceded it. Every man looked at the screen. They were sitting in a restricted Chinese bay, 5 miles from the most heavily defended coastline in the Pacific, looking at a patch of empty water where a ship had been 10 seconds before. The target had simply ceased to exist. Check the bottom, Miller ordered. Did they scuttle? Did they sink? Negative, sir. The water is only 80 feet deep here. If they went down, we would see the hull on the surface. They are not there. The executive officer looked at the commander. His face was pale. Sir, if they are not in the bay, and they did not pass us on the way in, then where did they go? The morning was still quiet. It would not stay that way. 6:21 in the morning. A jagged, rhythmic pulse filled the room. The officer at the console did not look up. His fingers flew across the keyboard. "Commander, we are painted. Multiple active radar locks. They are high frequency. Coastal defense batteries. They have us." Commander Miller stood perfectly still. Source: Hainan Island. 3 separate locations. They are using targeting radar. We are being tracked by YJ-12 surface-to-ship missiles. They are prepped for launch. 6:22 in the morning. The executive officer turned to the weapons panel. Tube 1 and 2 are flooded. Slave to the fire control system. We can counterfire at the shore batteries, sir, but it will be an act of war. Hold fire, Miller said. We are in their water. We do not fire unless they launch. What is the status of the bay? The sonar supervisor spoke with a tremor in his voice. Still empty, sir. No Sierra 1. No engine noise. The water is dead, but I am getting something else. A pressure change. It is not acoustic, it is physical. 6:23 in the morning. The bridge of a Chinese Type 056 Corvette began to round the headland. It was not the silent ghost ship. It was a standard patrol vessel. Behind it, 2 more silhouettes appeared in the morning mist. They were moving into position to block the exit of the bay. The North Carolina was trapped in 80 feet of water. The radio speaker crackled. A voice spoke in English. It was cold, precise. American submarine. You are in restricted waters. You are in violation of international law. Surface immediately or you will be engaged. This is your final warning. Miller ignored the radio. Sonar. What is that pressure change? 6:24 in the morning. The supervisor leaned into his screen. The waterfall display was no longer white. It was black. Deep, solid black. Sir, the seabed. It is rising. The navigator said we have 80 feet, Miller countered. The navigator is wrong, the supervisor shouted. Something is coming up from the silt. It is massive. It is directly beneath our keel. 50 feet. 40. It is displacing thousands of tons of water. The submarine began to tilt. The hull groaned as the water around it was forced upward. The USS North Carolina was being lifted. The ocean surface above them was bulging. 6:25 in the morning. The sonar supervisor pulled his headset off. He stared at the display in disbelief. Contact. Designated Sierra 2. It is not the Chinese vessel. It is bigger. Much bigger. It is right under us. The boat shuddered. A sound like grinding metal echoed through the pressurized hull. The American crew held on to their stations. As the world tilted 40 degrees, the sensors went dark. The radar locks from the shore vanished. The radio went silent. 6:26 in the morning. The USS North Carolina was no longer in the water. It was on it. The massive hull of the Virginia-class submarine was being lifted bodily toward the sky. Inside the command center, the crew was thrown against the bulkheads as the boat tilted at a violent angle. The sound was not an explosion. It was the sound of thousands of tons of seawater being displaced by something even larger. The photonic mast was still active, sending a flickering, distorted image to the main screen. As the submarine broke the surface, the camera captured a sight that defied every military sensor in the Pacific. Rising from the center of the bay was a structure the size of an aircraft carrier. It was obsidian black. It had no deck, no bridge, and no visible weaponry. It was a perfect, seamless curve of matte material that seemed to swallow the morning light. The USS North Carolina was perched on the edge of this rising mass like a toy. 6:27 in the morning. On the Chinese corvettes at the mouth of the bay, the situation was equally chaotic. Captain Zhao's experimental vessel was nowhere to be seen, but the 3 patrol boats were struggling to stay upright. The water in the bay was behaving like a whirlpool. The Chinese crews were not firing their missiles. They were firing white flares. In the language of the sea, they were signaling a maritime emergency. They were no longer hunters. They were victims of the same phenomenon. Commander Miller hauled himself up by the edge of the tactical table. His forehead was bleeding. Status. Give me anything. Everything is dead, sir. The electronic warfare officer shouted. The radar locks are gone because the radar itself is gone. We have a total electromagnetic pulse event. All circuits are open. We are on emergency battery power only. 6:28 in the morning. The massive black object continued to rise until it was nearly 50 feet above the surface of the bay. The USS North Carolina began to slide. The steel of the submarine's belly ground against the unknown material with a screech that vibrated through every man's teeth. The submarine slipped off the edge of the obsidian curve and crashed back into the water with a force that sent a massive wave toward the cliffs. Then, the silence returned. But it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of a vacuum. 6:29 in the morning. The black object did not move. It did not emit a radio signal. It simply sat in the center of the restricted Chinese bay. Around it, the water began to glow with a soft, bioluminescent blue. The light was coming from deep below the surface, pulsing in time with the hum that the sonar supervisor had detected earlier. The Chinese corvettes had stopped their engines. They were drifting, their crews standing on the decks in total shock. For the first time in the history of the modern era, two opposing superpowers were staring at the same thing, and neither side had a name for it. 6:30 in the morning. The blue light intensified until the entire bay was washed in a brilliant, blinding azure. The sensors on the North Carolina flickered back to life for a split second. In that moment, the sonar supervisor saw a reading that made him go cold. The object was not sitting on the seabed. It had no mass. According to the gravity sensors, the center of the bay was empty. The light reached a crescendo. Then, with a sound like a sharp intake of breath, the light vanished. The black object vanished. The mist of the bay was sucked into a central point and disappeared. The water rushed back in to fill the void, creating a series of massive waves that slammed into the cliffs. When the spray settled, the bay was truly empty. There was no ghost ship. There was no obsidian structure. There was only the USS North Carolina, 3 stunned Chinese corvettes, in a sea that was suddenly, terrifyingly normal. The pivot had happened. The world was no longer the one they had known 10 minutes ago. 6:35 in the morning. Inside the command center of the USS North Carolina, the emergency red lighting flickered and died. It was replaced by the steady, sterile white glow of the primary power grid. The nuclear reactor was stable. The turbines were spinning back up to speed. But the atmosphere inside the submarine was anything but normal. Men who had spent their lives studying the cold logic of acoustics and thermal layers were staring at their consoles as if the machines had betrayed them. Commander Miller wiped a smear of blood from his eye. He looked at the main screen. The external cameras showed the bay. The water was still agitated. Froth and white foam drifted on the surface, where the black object had been. There was no trace of the Chinese experimental ship. There was no trace of the obsidian structure. The sonar supervisor put his headset back on. He moved slowly. His hands were shaking. "Commander, I am bringing the passive arrays back online. The ambient noise is off the charts. The water is ringing. It sounds like a giant bell was just struck and we are sitting inside of it. Search for Sierra 1, Miller ordered. Is there any debris, oil, anything to indicate a hull breach? Searching now, sir, the supervisor replied. I have nothing. No metallic groans, no air pockets escaping. It is like the vessel was never there. And the other one, the big one, my sensors say the seabed is undisturbed. There are no impact craters in the silt. Whatever lifted us did not have any mass. 6:42 in the morning. On the bridge of the Chinese corvette Lianjiang, the Chinese captain stood at the railing of his bridge. He was looking at the American submarine through a pair of high-powered binoculars. His own electronic systems were slowly rebooting. The screens were filled with error messages and corrupted data. To his left, the other 2 patrol boats were circling slowly. They were keeping their guns trained on the USS North Carolina. The tactical officer stepped onto the bridge. His uniform was disheveled. Captain, High Command is on the secure line. They are demanding to know the status of the experimental vessel. They want to know if the Americans have deployed a gravitational weapon. The captain lowered his binoculars. Tell them the truth. Tell them the experimental ship is gone. Tell them the Americans are as confused as we are. Sir, the shore batteries are asking for target confirmation the officer said. They have a clear line of sight on the American sail. They are waiting for your command to fire. The captain looked at the American submarine. It was sitting low in the water. It looked vulnerable, but he had seen the way it was tossed aside by the black object. He had seen the blue light. Negative. Tell the batteries to stand down. If we fire now, we are starting a war over a ghost. We do not know what we saw. We do not know who the enemy is. 6:50 in the morning. Inside the North Carolina, the executive officer approached Miller. Sir, the Chinese are hailing us on the open channel. They are not using encrypted military frequencies. They are using the international distress frequency. Miller nodded. Put it on the speaker. A voice came through the static. It was the captain of the Chinese corvette, American vessel. This is the People's Liberation Army Navy. You are in our waters. But we have a mutual crisis. We have lost a ship. You have nearly lost yours. Do not submerge. Do not arm your weapons. We are sending a boarding party for a joint observation of the site. The executive officer looked at Miller. Sir, this is a trap. Miller looked at the empty water on the screen. He thought about the obsidian curve. He thought about the gravity sensors that read 0. It is not a trap. They are terrified, just like we are. Send the response. We will remain on the surface. We will cooperate. The two most powerful navies in the Pacific were standing still. They were no longer looking at each other. They were looking at the void, where the mystery had disappeared. The reassessment had begun. The tactical reality of the South China Sea had been shattered by something that did not belong to any nation. The tension was not gone. It had simply changed shape. 7:10 in the morning. The White House Situation Room and the Ministry of National Defense in Beijing. The secure fiber optic lines between the two capitals were alive with the most urgent communication in 20 years. This was the red line. It was reserved for the prevention of nuclear escalation. In Washington, the National Security Advisor stared at a satellite feed of the Hainan coast. The image showed a massive disturbance in the water, a white circle of foam that looked like a scar on the ocean surface. In Beijing, the chief of the general staff sat in a room filled with senior officers. Both sides were speaking through translators. The tone was not aggressive. It was clinical. It was the sound of two giants realizing they were both standing in the dark. Confirm your status, the American advisor said. We have a submarine on the surface. We have not authorized any weapons release. We are requesting an immediate ceasefire in the sector. The Chinese response came through 10 seconds later. We confirm no missiles have been launched. However, we have lost contact with an experimental surface platform. Our shore batteries are currently in a defensive posture. We are seeing atmospheric anomalies that our scientists cannot explain. Did the United States deploy a localized gravitational pulse? Negative, the advisor replied. We do not possess that technology. We were tracking your vessel because it was using a propulsion system we did not recognize. Our submarine was caught in the same event that took your ship. A long silence followed. It was the silence of two superpowers, admitting they were no longer the most advanced forces in the room. 7:25 in the morning. Inside the Combat Information Center of the USS North Carolina, Commander Miller watched the video feed from a Chinese rigid-hull inflatable boat as it approached the submarine. For the first time in his career, he saw Chinese sailors without their weapons drawn. They were carrying sensor equipment. They were looking at the water. They were looking at the sky. They were looking for the ship they had lost. The executive officer stood next to him. Sir, the Pentagon has authorized a data share. We are to provide the Chinese with our gravimetric readings from 625. They are providing us with their shore-based telemetry. It is a level of cooperation that would have been unthinkable an hour ago. Miller nodded. They are not worried about us anymore. They are worried about whatever was under our keel. Have the science officer prepare the data packets. I want every millisecond of that obsidian contact mapped. If it was not Chinese, and it was, not American, we need to know what it was. 7:30 in the morning. The sonar supervisor called the commander over to his station. His voice was a whisper. Sir, I have finished the initial reconstruction of the acoustic data. I found something in the noise. Right before the blue light. Right before the big object vanished. "What is it?" Miller asked. The supervisor played a filtered audio file. It was a rhythmic, pulsing sound. It was the same sound the Chinese ghost ship had made, but it was amplified 1,000 times. Underneath the pulse, there was a voice. It was not human. It was a series of mathematical tones that formed a perfect geometric progression. It was a signal. "It was a handshake, sir," the supervisor said. The Chinese ship did not disappear. It was collected. The black object was a transport. It came for the drive. It came for the technology. Miller stared at the screen. The reality of the situation was beginning to settle in. They had not stumbled upon a Chinese secret weapon. They had witnessed a recovery operation. The experimental drive the Chinese were testing was not their own. They had been using something they did not understand, and the owners had come back to claim it. The bay was quiet now. The waves had settled. But the strategic map of the world had just been rewritten. The mystery was no longer a military secret. It was a global emergency. 8:45 in the morning. The inner bay of Hainan. The water was calm, but the surface was littered with floating dead fish and fragments of pulverized coral. A Chinese rigid-hull inflatable boat sat directly alongside the hull of the USS North Carolina. Two American sailors stood on the curved steel of the submarine, passing a ruggedized data drive to a Chinese officer. There were no handshakes. No words were exchanged. The Chinese officer accepted the drive and signaled his pilot to move away. Inside the command center of the North Carolina, Commander Miller watched the interaction on a monitor. The tension in the room had shifted from the sharp edge of combat to a heavy, exhausted weight. The crew had been at battle stations for over 6 hours. "Data exchange is complete, sir," the executive officer reported. "The Chinese have provided their shore-based seismic and electromagnetic readings from the moment of the event. We have given them our passive sonar and gravimetric logs." Miller nodded slowly. "And the search for their vessel. The Chinese corvettes have finished their third sweep of the basin. They found nothing. No wreckage, no life rafts, no debris. The experimental ship is simply gone. They are officially declaring it a total loss with all hands." 9:30 in the morning. The orders from the 7th Fleet and the Pentagon were clear. The USS North Carolina was to exit the bay immediately. A safe corridor had been established. The Chinese shore batteries were transitioning to a standby mode. The immediate threat of a global conflict had been averted by the sheer scale of the unknown. Neither nation wanted to fight over a patch of ocean that had just demonstrated it was not under their control. "Helm. Ahead 1/3, Miller ordered. "Navigator. Lead us out the way we came in. Stay in the center of the channel." The submarine began to move. It felt different now. The water felt thin. The sonar supervisor reported that the acoustic properties of the bay had been permanently altered. The water was still ringing with a residual frequency that the computer could not filter out. It was a reminder that something massive had occupied this space. 9:55 in the morning. As the North Carolina rounded the headland, the 3 Chinese corvettes fell into a loose line behind them. It was not a pursuit, it was an escort. The Chinese captains were ensuring that the American submarine left their territorial waters without further incident. On the bridge of the lead corvette, the captain watched the American sail through his binoculars. He did not order his guns to track the target. He simply watched the wake. 10:15 in the morning. The submarine crossed the 12-mile limit and returned to international waters. The Chinese corvettes slowed and began a wide, synchronized turn back toward the coast of Hainan. The radio in the North Carolina crackled one last time. It was the same cold, precise voice from earlier. "American vessel. You are now in international waters. This sector is closed for further investigation. Do not return. We are both witnesses to the same truth. The ocean is larger than we believed." Miller did not respond. He watched the Chinese ships disappear into the morning haze. The mission was over. They had tracked a ghost, and they had found something much worse. They had found a predator that considered both of their navies to be irrelevant. The command center was silent. The screens returned to their standard tactical displays. The green and blue lights flickered with the steady rhythm of a boat that was safe. but no one felt safe. They had survived a collision with a reality they were not prepared for. Secure from battle stations, Miller said. Return to routine patrol depth. Set a course for Guam. We have a lot of data to explain. The North Carolina tilted its bow down and slipped beneath the waves. The South China Sea was once again a dark, empty expanse. The crisis had resolved, but the peace felt like a temporary truce with a power that did not care about their borders. 3 days later, 2 o'clock in the afternoon, the Pentagon. The briefing room was silent. High-resolution satellite imagery filled the wall-sized monitors. The images showed the inner bay of Hainan from 5 different angles. To the naked eye, the water looked blue and undisturbed. But the multispectral overlays showed a different reality. There was a thermal scarring on the seabed that should not exist. It was a perfect circle of fused sand and rock, 80 feet below the surface. A senior intelligence analyst pointed to a graph on the side of the screen. The gravimetric data from the North Carolina is definitive. The object that lifted the submarine had no physical mass. It was a localized distortion of space-time. Our best physics teams say it is 100 years ahead of anything we have on the drawing board. It did not push the water. It redefined the space the water occupied. An admiral leaned forward. His face was etched with a new kind of exhaustion. And the Chinese vessel, Sierra 1. Gone, the analyst replied. The Chinese have ceased all search and rescue operations. They are now treating the area as a contaminated zone. They are not looking for survivors. They are looking for answers. Our signals intelligence suggests they believe the drive they were testing acted as a homing beacon. The moment they achieved a stable field, they were detected. The room was filled with the weight of that realization. The Chinese had not invented a new propulsion system. They had found one. They had been trying to reverse engineer a piece of technology that did not belong to this world, and the moment they turned it on, the owners came back to claim it. 1 week later, the Pacific Ocean, the USS North Carolina was back at sea. The hull had been inspected and cleared for duty. There was no structural damage, but the electronics suite had required a total recalibration. The crew was different. The sonar supervisor no longer listened for the rhythmic pulse of diesel engines or the hum of nuclear reactors. He listened for the silence. He listened for the math. He spent his off-duty hours staring at the recording of the handshake. Those geometric tones were now the most classified data in the American inventory. The strategic map of the world had not changed on paper. The borders were the same. The treaties were still in effect. But every admiral in Washington and Beijing knew the truth. Modern warfare was no longer a game of 2 players. There was a third force in the deep. It was silent. It was advanced. And it was entirely indifferent to human ideology. No missiles had been fired. No ships had been sunk by enemy hands. But a war had nearly begun because of a misunderstanding of scale. Both nations had learned a hard lesson in the darkness of the Hainan Bay. They had been fighting over a pond while the ocean was occupied by something else. The strategic assessment was clear. The United States and China would continue their posturing. They would continue to sail their carriers and dive their submarines. But the nature of the shadow game had changed. Both sides were now looking over their shoulders. They were no longer the apex predators of the deep. The ocean returned to its natural state. The waves broke against the jagged cliffs of the headland. The sun rose over the South China Sea, turning the water into a sheet of polished glass. Below the surface, the dark water remained a mystery. It was a place of silence and pressure. We are not the masters of the deep. We are merely guests who have finally been noticed. And whatever is watching from the darkness is not finished with us.